Well, I'm back, everyone. Did you guys already introduce yourselves without me? Are you?
Yeah. Not just barely.
Okay, well, I'm going to welcome everybody this afternoon. Welcome to our session on Illinois Humanities Statewide Partnership Opportunities. Today, our presenters actually will be talking about the role of culture in community building, as well as some of the opportunities that communities have to partner with Illinois Humanities. So at this point, my name is Giselle Ham. Many of you know me. I'm program director here at the for the Mapping the Future of Your Community Strategic Visioning and Planning program here at the Institute for Rural Affairs. It's my pleasure to introduce Gabrielle Lyons. She's the executive director of Illinois Humanities, as well as Matt Meacham. He is a program manager for statewide engagement for Illinois Humanities. So it's my pleasure at this point to just turn it over to them.
Giselle, thank you so much. We're such fans of you and your work, and the chance to talk with everyone today is it's a real pleasure for us. You know, and I might just start off by asking folks to use the chat. You know, we sometimes get asked, well, what are the humanities? We'd love to know if someone said to you, what are the humanities? What example would you give, or how would you define that? We're curious. So if you don't mind putting your responses in the chat, a little warm up for the conversation we're gonna have. And if you're not already, I'm gonna share my screen. So let's see if this works.
And with that, I just wanted to mention, I forgot, as probably all of you know, if you have any questions or comments, just put them in the chat so that we can address them.
Oh, and I'm so sorry. I am going to try to have us play from the start. Here we go. So, Matt, do you mind keeping an eye on the chat as we go forward? Can everyone see my screen? Does that look right? Okay, great. So if you're not already familiar with Illinois Humanities, we're a nonprofit organization. We are the state affiliate for the National Endowment for the Humanities. So when the NEH was set up, there was a lot of concern that there be local representation for those federal dollars. And so when we were set up back in 1974, we were set up as a grant-making organization. Flash forward to us today, we really work in 3 arenas. We continue to make grants, and we're definitely going to talk about that today. We do free education programs. We also do free public programs that are really focused on strengthening our civic fabric. And we're increasingly concerned about, I think, the communities you're working with. Folks living in rural communities, folks that are under economic distress, the people that are highly impacted by mass incarceration, communities of color. These are places where small cultural organizations, humanities organizations have a really important role to play. And so I'm looking in the chat and I'm seeing some great responses to what are the humanities. Thank you, Andrea and Anna. You know, it's really about us being human. For us at Illinois Humanities, we really think about the public sphere of the humanities. And so today we're talking, you know, when we talk about our partners or programs or the opportunity to work together, what we're mostly thinking of are this ecosystem of organizations that includes historical societies, museums, literature organizations, libraries, media, local publications like your local newspaper. These are places where we're able to come together, be curious, have a dialogue, deliberate together. And so today, when we're talking about the humanities, those are the kinds of places we're talking about. Just a little sense of who we are before we talk about a couple of programs. Just in this past year during the pandemic, we were actually able to reach 13,000 folks. A lot of that was virtually, and it was in hybrid programming. We made grants to folks all over the state, and you can see those red dots, that constellation. That was what our partnership map looked like this year. So we really are trying to be statewide, and we really are trying to leverage the power of the humanities for things like economic development and planning. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Matt Meacham, to talk about 4 of the programs that we hope are meaningful to you or the folks that you work with. And one of the things we're really interested in is, as we talk today, we'll do the presentation at the beginning and the discussion towards the second half. But, you know, if you're hearing things that really resonate for you or is making you think of folks you're working with, we'd really like to hear about those, because we really believe that this work is how we get stronger as a state. Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you now to talk about programs.
Thanks, Gabe. And thank you all for being here. It's really great to be with you, and we appreciate the chance to participate. I'm originally from rural southwestern Illinois. I grew up just outside of Chester in Randolph County, and the cultural health of rural communities is especially important to me. So I really value the work that all of you do. Our Rhodes Scholar Speakers Bureau is one of our longest established programs. It's been in existence since 1997, and it invites Illinois authors, artists, educators, and other cultural practitioners to share their expertise and enthusiasm with people throughout the state. Rhodes Scholars enables organizations of all types and sizes to present compelling free admission cultural programs to their communities. Organizations that want to host Rhodes Scholars presentations select them from a roster, and our current season's roster, which is in effect through the end of this year, includes 44 presentations by 28 presenters from throughout the state, and those include 9 that are available in Spanish and 2 that are available in Mandarin. They address a wide variety of subject matter, everything from Aztec dance to Walt Whitman to coal mining songs to women's suffrage. Our Museum on Main Street program is a partnership between the Smithsonian Institution and State Humanities Councils that offers traveling exhibitions on significant themes in American culture to organizations in small communities. About every 2 years, the Smithsonian offers us one of these exhibitions. We then invite organizations throughout Illinois to apply to host it, and we select 6 of those and construct a tour that takes place over a period of about 9 or 10 months. The host organizations develop locally focused companion exhibitions and public programs with assistance from us. Museum on Main Street gives rural and small town Illinoisans opportunities to view Smithsonian produced exhibits in their own communities, but just as importantly, it enables the local organizations that host the exhibits to enhance their capacities in various ways: knowledge and skill development, volunteer-based growth, new partnerships and resources, publicity that helps to raise their profile within their community or their region, and so on. The exhibition that we currently have on tour is called Voices and Votes, Democracy in America. That tour is nearing its conclusion. It's at its last stop at the General John A. Logan Museum in Murfreesboro, where it will be until March 19th. It's exactly what the title suggests. It explores questions stemming from the decision of our national founders to establish a government that entrusted the power of the nation not in a monarchy but in its citizens. So questions such as who has the right to vote, what are our civic responsibilities and freedoms, whose voices will be heard, and so on. Touring concurrently with Voices and Votes is the Illinois Freedom Project exhibition, which examines the pursuit of civil rights by and for African Americans in Illinois from the French colonial era through early 20th century Chicago. And it's currently at the African American Museum of Southern Illinois in Carbondale, near Murfreesboro, until March 19th. And then that will conclude our current tour. Our next Museum on Main Street tour, which will take place in 2023 and 24, will feature an exhibit called Spark Places of Innovation, which will highlight stories of small towns around the country that have enhanced their vitality through innovations in fields such as technology, agriculture, economic development, education, the arts, and many others. It so happens that 7 of the small towns that will be mentioned in Spark are Illinois communities, and including some that have participated in the Mapping the Future of Your Community program that Giselle manages. And so we're currently accepting applications from prospective host organizations that are interested in presenting Spark when it tours Illinois in 2023 and 24, and that application period is open through March 4th. So if any of your organizations or those with which you're familiar might be interested, please encourage them to apply. The Country and the City, Common Ground in the Prairie State, is a program series that we have conducted since 2018 that addresses issues significant to both urban and rural communities in Illinois, drawing upon a wide variety of humanities methods and content. Several of those programs are available on the Illinois Humanities YouTube channel. A couple of examples are Christine Brewer and Noam Pekelny in Performance and Conversation. Christine Brewer, as you may know, is an operatic soprano who grew up in rural Illinois, and Noam Pekelny is a virtuoso progressive bluegrass banjoist who grew up on the north side of Chicago. And so they compare notes on what it's like to be an artist specializing in a tradition that comes from a different setting or a different cultural community other than their own, and what they've learned about rural urban dynamics by doing that. Also, the People, Places, and Power series, which focuses on the relationship between population distribution and the allocation of political power and public resources. There are 3 video presentations in that series: Gallatin County Edition, Fulton County Edition, and Cook County Edition. And coming up later this year, we're planning to produce programs that examine the history of Kaskaskia, our first state capital, and its current significance, as well as the role of populism or populist movements and traditions in Illinois' political history. The Gwendolyn Brooks Youth Poetry Awards continues the legacy of the Youth Poetry Awards program that our state's poet laureate, Gwendolyn Brooks, founded and coordinated from 1969 to 2000. We have had the privilege of coordinating this program for the past 6 years. We're currently accepting submissions for the 6th annual Gwendolyn Brooks Youth Poetry Awards. The submission deadline is May 6th. It's open to young people throughout Illinois, certainly including in rural communities and in locations across the state. We really encourage young poets, including young people who may not think of themselves as poets, but who have written original poetry. We really encourage them to apply. Again, the deadline is May 6th. It's open to young people, kindergarten through 12th grade, in any kind of school, including homeschooling or any institution. The winners will be notified by August 1st, and there will be an awards ceremony at the Logan Center for the Arts in Chicago on August 20th, and more details are available on our website. As Gabe mentioned earlier, we really learned a lot as a result of our COVID relief and recovery grants program, and Gabe will talk more about that in just a moment. But Let me just close by saying a few words about our regular community grants program, which is our longest standing program at Illinois Humanities. We've been offering financial support and other forms of support and resources to cultural organizations throughout our state since we began in the mid-1970s. Currently, our three main categories of community grants are Vision, Action, and Multiplier. Vision grants, Vision grants are intended for organizational planning, board development, staff development, et cetera, project planning, technical assistance, and related pursuits. Those offer up to $2,000. The action grant category, which is the category in which we award the largest number of grants, is intended for public humanities projects of all kinds, and we'll share some examples in just a moment. Action grants offer up to $4,000. And then the multiplier grant category is also intended for public humanities projects, but specifically projects that involve substantial collaboration among multiple organizations, and hopefully will lead to long-term network development, long-term collaboration. We have a number of other grant opportunities. One that's especially pertinent here, I think, is called Activate History, which offers small grants up to $500 for activities that draw upon artifacts, archival collections, museum exhibits, et cetera, as a way of addressing topics or issues that have some current significance. So bringing history to bear upon current events and current concerns. For Vision, Action, and Multiplier grants, our deadlines currently are January 15th, May 15th, and September 15th. For the Activate History grants, those deadlines are March 1st and September 1st. We have, over the past number of years, awarded quite a few grants to organizations in small communities. Here are just some examples of grants that have been awarded to organizations in communities of 25,000 or fewer residents during the past 2 years. In Shawneetown, we awarded the Gallatin County Historical Society support for a commemoration of the flood of 1937 Tent City along the Ohio River. The Lawrence County Historical Society did a wonderful multimedia project, which kind of centered on an exhibition, but included other components as well, examining African-American Civil War soldiers from Lawrence County. The New Philadelphia Association has a lecture series every year that celebrates the legacy of New Philadelphia, which was one of the very first African-American communities in the United States, founded by free African Americans prior to the Civil War, and that's in Pike County in Western Illinois. So these are just some examples of activities that we've supported in communities under 25,000 residents. And as we mentioned, the grant making that we had the opportunity to do in response to the pandemic, in an effort to support the work of cultural organizations throughout our state, in this time of incredible adversity and challenge, really taught us a lot about cultural activity that's happening throughout the state, how it relates to economic conditions, and how organizations like ours can can help to be supportive and make constructive contributions. So Gabe is going to tell us more about what we learned from all of that.
Matt, thank you so much. I mean, I think, you probably get a sense that this is just scratching the surface of the richness and diversity of programs, and Matt's encyclopedic knowledge of the state is something we really value and benefit from. We'll also say that most folks don't really think a lot about why the humanities matter in Illinois. And I think one of the things that is really important, I think, in the context of this convening is the idea that almost every county, without exception, has a humanities organization in it. And that matters because of the kinds of things that we're all trying to do together in terms of making the state more livable, making the state more equitable. And so, we didn't get into a lot of examples of programs. You got a little taste in the ones Matt just mentioned, but a couple of takeaways. I mean, one, public humanities organizations drive significant revenue in Illinois. And the kinds of experiences that happen in these places are really critical for civic pride, civic identity. And as we're finding out, these organizations are playing roles in communities that are under various kinds of distress. And that's something I think we want to highlight just from a very high level, taking us back. Unfortunately, this is a picture of maybe something you experienced in March of 2020. The pandemic was unfolding very quickly. And for us, we were really trying to understand, well, what is happening for all of these organizations? And what was happening for these hundreds of organizations that we work with around the state are probably what you saw: closing, struggling, trying to figure out how to keep the lights on and make things work. We found in the first year alone that our partner organizations had lost more than $10 million in revenue. 14% really feared closing permanently. And they were reaching many, more than 1 million, almost 2 million fewer people. And just to kind of remind you, a county historical society, that is the lifeblood of our history and our heritage in Illinois. They're often preserving the memory and meaning making in a very unique way that nobody else does and nobody else can. So these are very concerning ideas. I'm so sorry, I'm trying to drive this computer. Over the past 2 years, thanks to federal relief funding, primarily because of our role as an intermediary, we've been highly engaged in emergency relief and recovery funding. So we've been able to give away more than $2 million to almost 400 organizations, and again, across 78 counties. And we've been increasingly focused on how do we bolster this grant making with the kind of capacity building and community building so that organizations, again, particularly in rural areas, are able to be connected. Because the truth is, this map of organizations, primarily again outside of Cook County, have very little access to traditional philanthropy, either because of where they're located, they don't fit into normal larger foundation purviews, or because of the capacity that they have, and because of their size. These are often small places, primarily volunteer driven. So this is an ecosystem that I know you're familiar with. We're starting to try to think about how do we strengthen the cultural infrastructure collectively. And just again, just a couple of ways to continue to think about this ecosystem. We looked at, well, where are our grantees? This is last year's data. I just want to be clear, it's not a comprehensive data set. Where are our organizations and what can we know about the places they're operating? One of the things is that these are organizations that by and large are operating in places that were under distress and duress, specifically economically, before the pandemic even hit. These are places that over the course of the pandemic, and again, please note that these maps are about a year old at this point. These are places that experienced extremely high and sometimes disproportionately incident rates of COVID. So these are places that really matter in their communities. So what do they do when given emergency relief support? They're hiring folks, they're documenting, they're capturing oral history, but they're also really helping people stay connected. They're helping people mitigate isolation. They're building community resilience. And as we think about, you know, what is it humanities organizations do? What we know about our grantee partners is that they really are interested in being more responsive, inclusive, and reflective of the communities in which they exist. And that is really on par with the national conversation that we're learning. The public wants arts and cultural organizations to be active participants. They want to see their communities better reflected. So what we're learning from our partners about what they want and what we're hoping to support them with through things like training around facilitated dialogue. How do you have difficult conversations? That's a kind of workshop that we offer, for example. What our organizations right here in Illinois want is also what communities want of their organizations. This idea of kind of where the humanities can fit in planning in terms of meaning making, you know, and placemaking, these are not unfamiliar ideas, right? And we're seeing things like that's happened in lots of cities. I think for us and in partnership with you, and we hope this conversation, you know, what can it mean to know that we have this rich, diverse ecosystem in Illinois? And what could that mean at a regional and community level about how we might work together and partner with all of you? You know, we believe the humanities keep us creative, connected, and in community. And they do that when we do these things together. Matt and I would love to have a discussion with you for the rest of this time. We're happy to answer questions. We're also really curious to hear from you what resonates for you about this conversation. And if there are organizations you can think of or places that you're working that we should be connected with or know about, we'd love to hear about that. So thank you so much for your attention. I'm going to stop screen sharing now and open it up for our Q&A and conversation. I'll start by looking in the chat to see if there's a question. Oh, great. Giselle, thank you for putting our website in there. That's really, really helpful. And happy to answer questions. Between Matt and I, we probably can answer questions about most of the programs available, but if we can't, we'll be sure to put you in touch with our colleagues who definitely will be able to answer the questions.
Don't be shy. These guys are so helpful, and we've had many of our mapping communities get resources and grant funding through Illinois Humanities, and it's just a great, they have a great organization and lots of wonderful programs. So don't be shy. They're here to answer your questions.
I'd be really interested in knowing where you all are from. If you wouldn't mind just saying so in the chat or verbally, either way.
I'll start. I'm Andrea Runge. I'm with Lincoln Economic Advancement and Development in Lincoln. I'm happy to hear about your programs. Looking actually specifically, we've got a Lincoln Arts Institute in our downtown. They have organized themselves as a for-profit, which makes them ineligible for a lot of opportunities, but really looking for ways to help them focus on their community work.
Well, you know, Andrea, I appreciate you mentioning the distinction, and many newer places are setting themselves up as for-profit. I think that something like our Activate History might be a place to look, but the other piece is that partnering doesn't always mean we have to have a grant. I think that knowing that there's a culturally active community is really helpful. And a lot of times, for example, if an exhibit is coming into town through moms, that might be a great partner to bring attention to, again, local history, local stories, and, you know, the community assets we have. Matt, I don't know if you want to add on to that.
Sure. First of all, I love Lincoln. My dad's side of the family is originally from Logan County. Dad grew up in New Holland, and so we visited relatives in Lincoln regularly. You know, when I was growing up, and we've had a number of activities recently in Atlanta. So I've gotten to go to the Atlanta Museum and Library many times over the past couple years. One thing that fascinates me about Lincoln is really, in my mind, it's really quite a landmark in public humanities, because it was where Langston Hughes wrote his first poem when he was in, I think, 7th or 8th grade in Lincoln. It was also where Reinhold Niebuhr, the great, sort of social theologian and social ethicist, began his career as a minister. And it was also where William Keepers Maxwell, who's a great novelist and writer of short stories and literary critic, was from, and he's, drew upon his roots in Lincoln. So I often say that, within just one community in Illinois, we had those 3 milestones in public humanities history, and they all happened to occur in the very first place that was named for Lincoln, even prior to his being president. I'm really glad to see that we have a shout out from Savannah, where we recently had the Voices and Votes exhibit, and have had the chance to award several grants. Steve, I think maybe you and I have met. Were you involved in Voices and Votes at the Savannah Historical Society? Oh, Steve, looks like you're muted.
Sorry, I did the video instead of the, I'll get off of that. I wasn't available to participate in that, but very well aware of the Historical Society and things that are going on here. So we appreciate the organization's support and so forth. So thank you.
Great. We really love Savannah.
I was just looking on your website too. I see you got something coming up in Mount Carroll, which is just 10 miles up the road or down the road, and then later on this year up in Galena. So appreciate your support up here in the northwest corner.
I got to take my son. We did a little escape in the over his Christmas break, and got to stay in a little cabin out just outside of Savannah in the Mississippi. We had so much fun in the preserves that were around there, and it's a really beautiful part of the state, and we really enjoyed ourselves. I'm looking forward to going back when there's a little less snow on the ground.
Yeah, great. Glad to hear it. Thank you.
Happy to see Highland represented as well. That's, of course, that's just down the road from us. We have our Southwestern Illinois office in Edwardsville, where I am now. And Highland happens to be one of the communities that will be featured very prominently in the Spark exhibit from Museum on Main Street that we mentioned.
One of the things that, maybe we could get a little show of hands or a little reaction. How many people in the room right now are planners, or actually planners, or part of a community development or economic development effort? Okay, so now, okay, I see a couple of hands coming up. Great. So, one of the things is I've spent a lot of time doing, community and urban planning before I came on board at Illinois Humanities. I actually did quite a bit with youth. And, one of the things that I think is really exciting is the way in which the stories of the places where people live can really, really enable and ground things like community planning efforts. And so that's a place where, something like an exhibit that comes to town, which might feel kind of far afield, actually can be a great excuse to have a conversation about what people want, what they want to see, or to highlight investments that have really made a difference in the quality of life. So I'll just give an example. The MOMS, which is Museums on Main Street, when those exhibits come to town, we do a lot of work. Matt really does a lot of work to help that exhibit host highlight local collections and local stories. And so, there may be ways where an organization you work with has something going on that's an opportunity for you to have the conversation you want to have in a new light. And obviously, the other pieces are grants. So while the organizations you particularly may not work for, may not be eligible, these are resources that we know are really hard to come by and that these dollars can make a big difference. So the other thing is, please, as you're thinking about this, don't hesitate to reach out and just ask, like, I heard about this, might this be available? How could this work? We have a really, really helpful team that's really committed to finding these bridges.
I think one of the things too, and I don't know, you can talk a little bit about it. What I like about many of your programs is that they're not like super competitive, and that you're able to kind of spread those resources around so that, it's not where, Chicago is going to get all of, $8 million. That you really do a good job of making sure even the smaller requests, the smaller proposals can get funded as well. And I don't know if you want to kind of address that too.
Sure. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about from the grants perspective, maybe as a starting point?
Sure. Well, first of all, with our regular community grants program, the Vision, Action, and Multiplier grants program that we discussed, I can say with absolute certainty that when those of us on the staff who are involved in evaluating grant applications, as well as our grants committee, which consists of members of our board as well as some external partners, whenever we get grant applications from very small communities, particularly from small communities that are located far away from any of the major metropolitan areas in our state, we really get excited. Both our coworkers and the folks on our grants selection committee really are really enthusiastic about having the opportunity to support cultural activity that that addresses cultural needs and also magnifies cultural assets in rural communities around the state. So I can say with complete honesty that you shouldn't worry at all that being from a rural area or a small community is going to be a disadvantage when applying for those grants. If anything, it's a plus. It's something that we really prioritize, or at least really value. And just one other comment. Some of the other grant opportunities that we've been able to offer over the past few years, I think have been especially well suited to smaller communities in multiple regions of the state. One, of course, is the pandemic relief and recovery grants that Gabe discussed. That really gave us a chance to engage with, as Gabe mentioned, dozens of organizations in small communities in all parts of Illinois. Another one, though, was something that we did during the Illinois Bicentennial called the Forgotten Illinois 200 grants, which were then sort of translated into an online exhibition that's still available to look at. Those were intended to highlight episodes in Illinois history or stories of people and places in Illinois that are lesser known, but that, that deserve to be better known, and from which there's something that we can learn today. And so, naturally, we received applications from many communities around the state who had fascinating stories to tell and instructive stories to tell that, that we don't get to hear as often as we should. And so that was a great opportunity for us to engage with rural communities also.
Maybe, I don't know if this feels like a stretch, right? Like we're talking about these projects, but back to this idea of, what does economic development look like when we're doing regional planning in this moment in time? And one of the things that could be, for example, maybe your firm is a nonprofit, or maybe you have a local historical society, they could apply for a project grant where they could be part of a planning session. They could get a grant to work with you to review your plans and maybe tell local stories. So that would, now, again, I am not working in the Office of Economic Development, and maybe that sounds like a nightmare to you. On the other hand, if it feels like this is helpful, that's really the bridging we're talking about, because the perspectives that are right at home where you are already are not usually at the table. But those folks already know how to do this, or could do this if they had support, or would welcome the chance to maybe be in front of folks they wouldn't know. So that would be an example. And that could be even highway improvement. Well, a lot of the roads in Illinois are on historic trails. So that may not be relevant right now when you're trying to pick your asphalt, but maybe the chance to have other people care about that comes because we're having a discussion about who we are, who we were, and who we want to be. That's where the humanities partnership can maybe help. It's hard days. It's hard days all around. But I think the other thing is these conversations are already happening in those places, and we're always happy to make introductions. So even if you're like, I don't really know who's around and I don't really have the time, our team, obviously Matt is with us today, you could reach out to us and say, I'm intrigued, I'm not really sure where to start. We could at least let you know who all is around you and what they're doing. And that's something that I think we're realizing more and more, is the visibility of this community is pretty low in a lot of places, and people don't already know each other. So if we can even be helpful that way, that's a great starting point. I'm just curious who's by me, or there's a group by us. Could you help us think about what might be a good project? Doesn't have to be already baked.
Do any of you have any community organizations or initiatives that you're sitting there wondering, wonder if this is something that Illinois Humanities might be able to help us with? I mean, if you have any projects you're thinking of right now and just aren't sure if that kind of falls under the Illinois Humanities umbrella, I'd encourage you to just ask now. I mean, this is a good time. You've got Gabe and Matt here at the ready to answer your questions. We can't blame it on the conference food today, so making everybody sleepy. Go ahead, Matt, sorry.
I was going to mention one other thing. I know we're really have our professional hats on today, but the other thing is all of our programs are free and a lot of them are online. So Matt mentioned People, Places, Power. It's all on YouTube, but if you kind of want a little escape and you haven't gotten down to Fulton County, it opens with a really wonderful introduction to that place. And so we have a lot of programs online, but the other thing is our programs attract folks from all around the state. And so we happen to have one tonight on Afrofuturism. It's free, it's on Zoom. We have a couple, I think we're closing in on 150 people, but those are people from all over. So if you're just feeling like you'd like to be in a conversation about something that you're just personally interested in, it's a nice way to, again, have a conversation with someone you might not meet otherwise.
just a couple thoughts to kind of follow up on what Gabe has said. You know, two ways in which I think we can be helpful and supportive, at least potentially, to small communities. One is that, you know, our grants and other programs and resources in one way or another can help to sustain local cultural traditions. And so, you know, for example, if you know of local local artistic traditions, folk traditions of whatever kind, whether that's you know, music, stories, quilting, blacksmithing, whatever it happens to be, you know, and you're concerned that those kinds of traditions are disappearing, or you know, or you're concerned that the historical memories of episodes in history that have been important to your community over the years are starting to fade, and people don't fully recognize how important they are and how they've helped to define local culture. There are various ways, you know, in which our grants and other resources, you know, can help to sustain you know, those kinds of local traditions, local historical memory. One quick example that comes to mind is the Hardin County Historical Society. You know, Hardin County is located on the Ohio River, and there's so much you know, really rich lore about the outlaws of Cave-in Rock, and you know, the legend of Billy Potts and so on in that region of the state. They applied for a grant from us to do some kind of creative, you know, interpretation and some sort of updated interpretation of a lot of that lore, you know, that really emphasizes its current significance and why it's still relevant to that place today. And just a quick anecdote. I hope I'm not sort of, you know, telling tales out of school here, but when that application, you know, came before our grant selection committee, I thought, you know, I may have to do some sort of special pleading for this one. I may have to, you know, try to explain why it's so important to people in this, you know, this very rural area of southeastern Illinois. But it turns out I didn't have to do a thing. It got straight perfect scores from all the members of the grants committee. So that gives you a sense of how genuinely eager they are to support cultural activities in small communities. The other specific thing that I was going to mention has now slipped my mind. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Gabe or anyone else who has anything to say, and I'll see if I can think of it in the next few minutes here.
Leslie, I don't mean to call you out, but I noticed you're unmuted. Did you have a thought or a question? Well, I might make an ask of you all in the time that we have, which is if you find yourself in a project, maybe you have to spend money, or it's okay, Leslie, I didn't mean to call you out and embarrass you. Feel free to jump in though if you want. But if you have a project on deck, we would love to talk with you and learn with you. So if this is a new field, but you've got work to do and we can be helpful, it's less about adding and more about learning together. My sense is the conversation about infrastructure is just different this time around because of the history of what those kinds of projects have been, that regional planning is really regional and it's across state borders, right? It's across county borders. We're understanding our identities in new ways. You know, that is a place where the humanities is really strong and could be an asset. It's also a place that's usually left out of the conversation. So, you know, we would welcome an invitation to say, we don't exactly know how this would fit in, but if you want to be a listening partner or just sit in, we'd appreciate that, because we think there's a way we could be working together differently, particularly around this intersection of planning and economic development, and particularly at this moment that we're in, that is challenging on so many fronts. it's part of why I think we were so excited to get the invitation. I'm sorry we can't be in person. I was looking forward to a road trip personally, but maybe next year we will get to be in person.
I remember the other thing that I was going to say, which actually does tie in with what Gabe just said. Another sort of emphasis of ours across many of our programs and activities is dialogue, and especially dialogue about challenging issues and potentially controversial issues and so on. And learning how to facilitate dialogues in constructive ways, which of course there's a real art to that, and there's specific skills and techniques and so on that can be helpful in trying to ensure that discussions about challenging and possibly divisive issues are actually constructive. And someone mentioned in one of the sessions this morning that because we're living in such an ideological age, that many subjects that arise in small communities that years ago wouldn't have been controversial at all and would have been just, people would have thought of them as purely practical, economic matters or logistical matters, now have become political footballs. And issues that you might not think could be fashioned into political footballs, and yet they have been. And so the public humanities, I think, can be really helpful in fostering constructive conversations about those kinds of issues. Often if you use a short text of some kind, a poem, short passage of literature, short passage from a work of history as a sort of a grounding or a starting point for conversations, that can really help to orient the discussion and put things into perspective. And there are various ways that we can help with that. Or a shared cultural experience of some kind to start off a discussion like that. If you have a meal together in which everybody shares food representing their cultural communities, or you have music representing everyone's cultural traditions, to start off with, and kind of establish the fact that we're all fellow human beings with something to contribute. That can often set the stage for a conversation that's more productive than it might otherwise be. So if there are ways that we can help with that, and I'm sure that there are, whether through our grants or other programs and other resources that we offer, we would love to help with that.
Maybe I'll just I know we're starting to run out of time, but Giselle, maybe I'll put an offer on the table that if it seems like some of the community involved is interested in a kind of facilitated dialogue training, maybe that's a chance of something we could offer to this community. It's something we do with our grantee partners, but if that turns out to be of interest, again, we're really grateful for this opportunity. And Giselle, I know you put our emails in the chat. Thank you for that. I think we will be sharing the PowerPoint, and we've got some notes in there. So, if you didn't catch everything, but again, just on behalf of all of us at Illinois Humanities, thanks for your interest and your concern about how we can kind of strengthen our civic selves and where the humanities might fit in. Giselle, if there's anything else you need from us, please let us know.
Awesome. Well, we're about out of time, folks. So thank you so much, Gabe and Matt, and thank you all of you who participated in the session today. So I guess we're going to move out of the breakout room now. So see you soon.